How do you feel about the issue of trans athletes in women's sport, given that it's so obviously unfair and unequal?
In a few moments, I'll sign a historic executive order.
Now you're going to go out and win those events, right?
A female fencer stands up for fairness.
This is where a lot of the backlash against the so-called trans community comes from.
We're capable of seeing with our human eyes.
We're honored to be joined today by the brave swimmer Riley Gaines.
This was my first time competing against a transgender individual.
But tied for fifth was a trans athlete.
No. Women would never win a medal again if you had your way.
You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't.
I just got really sad and I started crying.
This is what happens when you twist God's design.
Do I have to just avoid all tournaments because there's going to be somebody who's trans there?
Police did arrest somebody after a confrontation.
Obviously, this is complicated.
It's not complicated! It's not complicated!
You guys are giving us an 80-20 issue.
What was also the big wokeism thing?
Hormonally interact with their body in some sort of a Dr. Frankenstein way.
Or they compete in a new section altogether, a trans athlete. What's wrong with that?
Yeah,
So a new separate but equal league is what you're saying.
Can I jump in here? The solution for this is very simple, and we've had the solution.
So a lot of people are talking about this. So that you know where I'm coming from, I've briefly played one sport my whole life. Soccer, football, and I always played defense because I didn't like running. I remember one practice where the coach got the parents involved and I was having a lot more fun with my dad on the field. So I was running around a lot more. Coach pulled me aside and said, "Hey, if you keep this up, maybe we'll put you on offense." And so for the rest of that practice, I ran less. But I've also played Super Smash Bros. Melee competitively. And I know it's an esport and different in many ways, but I include it to emphasize that I understand competition. I was never realistically close to this goal, but my overall drive, my overall desire was to play it professionally. And so I get why people are infatuated with competition. And since football is in direct competition to church for the Sunday primetime slot, it's clear Americans care a lot about this. But I think men in women's sports is just a way to hijack Americans' existing social passions and move them in an antisocial direction. However, I want to tackle head-on these different points of concern. Sports. I want to take this seriously. If you're someone who is concerned about sports in this way, my goal here is to honestly explore these ideas and see if we can't learn a thing or two along the way. Every professional athlete has dedicated much of their time to perfecting their sport. Even at a less serious level, such as middle or high school, things like scholarships can be on the line. So it makes sense that we want fairness in the implementation of sports. But with that in mind, let's remember that empathy is mandatory for all parties involved, and let's get into it. When it comes to gender and sex, often different terms can get mixed up between different people with different beliefs. So for the purposes of the first section of this video, when I say man, I mean biological males or cis men. And when I say woman, I mean biological females or cis women, unless otherwise noted. To my trans friends watching, sorry, you don't exist for the next 20 minutes, but you will reappear by the end. For now, just pay attention to the liminal space between the Magatopia and this world and let me know how it is when you return. Okay, preamble out of the way, sports ball. The place I want to start this conversation is sports are an imaginary playtime created by one subspecies of ape after they found out that round thing roll good. Sports are made up, right? I don't say that to discount how impactful made up things are in our life. I mean, Donald Trump farts and the stock market wiggles. It's obvious that gender dynamics play an important role in this conversation. So with that in mind, who is better at sports? Girls or boys? Most people would say boys are better at sports, but to that I say, which sport? At what age? Always? It isn't even until around 14 that boys are, on average, taller than girls. Pre-puberty, there's virtually no distinction between their athletic abilities. Furthermore, let's remember, sports are from our imaginations. I mean, trivially, if we made up a sport, boob can. Oh no, not boob can. If we made up a sport boob can, where the objective is to whack a soda can as far off the corner of a table as possible with your boob, and if your ribcage touches it all, you're disqualified. Women would be far better at boob can. And for the pedants furiously typing away right now, yeah, sure, some larger men might be able to compete in boob can, but you can imagine weight categories, like boxing. There would be a certain weight category at which men can't really compete against women at all in boob can. And my goal in pointing all of this out is how fundamentally arbitrary these boundaries are, how subject to our whims and imaginations the rules of sports are. Boob can favors women's bodies to a comical degree. It also sounds like the fetishistic fever dream of a straight man. Then sure, I made it up. Okay, fair's fair. Boob can was literally made up 30 seconds ago. What does this have to do with real sports? Okay. Who of men or women is better at NASCAR? This may seem like a trivial example, but I think we all agree NASCAR is a sport, and I think we all agree men have no biological advantage in NASCAR, and yet it's very male-dominated. Well, I think most of us would agree anyway. If you're watching this video and think women are bad drivers, I encourage you to Google why men pay more for car insurance and get back with me. I mean, if anything, women's average smaller frame is an advantage in NASCAR because it's less weight, you know, a small percentage point, but it's still less. If anything, being a woman is a biological advantage in NASCAR. But whatever. So despite the fact that women are perfectly capable of competing in NASCAR, there are virtually no NASCAR wins attained by women. Danica Patrick, widely considered the most prolific female driver, finished top 10 7 different times, but never finished first. And since there is no biological advantage, perhaps there's something else keeping women from competing. Hold that thought for later. If you would humor me with one final trivial example, I think we all would agree that chess is a competition that is completely gender indifferent, right? There are no biological advantages that men have over women. And I say competition because, in my opinion, chess is more of an esport than a traditional sport. And while we're at it, let's throw all esports into this category of trivially gender-indifferent competitions. So it would be absolutely wild to restrict competitors based on their biological sex or trans identity in this case. Right? So that would never happen. Right? I mean, what are we saying here? Are we saying women can't use brain as good as man? Are we saying women are stupid? Like, I assume not, right? I hope not. But if that's not what we're saying here, what's left is simply an attack on trans women. And so that's where I think it's quite obvious to see this antisocial lean to this kind of rhetoric. There's a bit of fear-mongering on this issue, despite the surface-level argument being about fairness. Okay, I've been annoying enough. Let's look at a more traditional physical sports example. So the question of the video, who is better at swimming, men or women? Well, if we look at the time for the fastest male and female Olympic swimmers in the long course 50-meter freestyle category, Cesar Cilio has a time of 20.91 seconds for men, and Sarah Sjöström has a time of 23.61 seconds for women. Case closed. However, did you notice how many adjectives I needed to describe the category? The long course, Olympic, 50-meter freestyle category is what we just looked at. What about other categories? For the long course 1500-meter Olympic freestyle category, Bobby Finke has a time of 14 minutes and 30.67 seconds in the men's, and Katie Ledecky has a time of 15 minutes and 20.48 seconds in the women's. Still a gap, for sure, but as a percentage, it's getting closer. Sarah Sjöström has a time that is 13% slower than Cesar Celios in the shortest LCM Olympic freestyle category. But Katie Ledecky, her time is only 6% slower than Bobby Finke's in the longest LCM Olympic freestyle category. The difference here has been cut in half. This is a relatively well-known trend where the longer distance the Olympic swimming category is, the closer in time men and women become. So that we can have a more visual representation of this, let's look at some rectangles. Yeah, the Olympics is extremely litigious and I'm not taking any chances, but this is actually blurred footage from the Tokyo 2020 Olympics that I've put some rectangles over the swimmers. Purple is for men because I'm a man and that's my favorite color, and pink is for women because every woman who has ever lived loves the color pink. Yeah, I'm no swimming expert. In fact, saying I go swimming instead of floating or standing on the bottom of the pool is probably an exaggeration. But from what I understand, these swimmers are doing the backstroke. If you look closely at the purple rectangles, the men are very slightly faster from a dead sprint at the start of the race. So one thing I want to pay attention to is the fact that the men are already ahead of the women at the start of this clip. This could be wrong, I've told you about my experience swimming, but to my eye, from what I understand, this is because there's a wall. Swimmers normally start off by pushing off of the wall and looking at it. The men do go farther. Pushing off of a wall uses the explosive power of the legs. Men have stronger legs, and so they go farther. That's how it seems to me. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. This is a choice. If we wanted to, we could start races from a dead start in open water, rather than next to a wall. For all I know, this could exaggerate the gender differences in swimming, I have no clue, but I think it's important to point out all of the ambiguity and arbitrary features in the rule set we've designed. And who knows what that outcome could be with a different rule set. To that point, what do you think happens if we extend the length of the swim even more? Rather than 50 or 1500 meters, what about 15,000? Ultra-distance swimming, or open water swimming, sees events such as the Catalina Channel Swim, the English Channel Swim, and the Manhattan Island Marathon Swim. Analysis of these so-called triple crown of open water swimming events yields some interesting results for our purposes. Overall, women were about 0.06 kilometers per hour faster than overall men. However, if you looked at the annual 5 fastest swimmers, women were about 0.07 kilometers per hour slower than men. In the Catalina Channel Swim specifically, the fastest woman ever was faster than the fastest man ever by about 22 minutes. The 3 fastest women were faster than the 3 fastest men by about 20 minutes. And the 10 fastest women were faster than the 10 fastest men by about 1 minute. When it comes to the Manhattan Island Marathon Swim, the 10 fastest women were about 13% faster than the 10 fastest men. So those were some ultra-distance swimming events where women actually outperformed men overall. But to be fair, that's not the whole of the data, so in the 3,000 meter at the FINA World Championships, men were faster than women for all age categories under 75. So above 75, grandma still got that shit. It seemed that in shorter open water swimming events where the water temperature was higher, women have a disadvantage compared to men. In the marathon swim at Lake Zurich, the male record was about 2% faster than the female record. For the annual winners, men were about 12% faster. Taking all of this into account, the researchers concluded, based on these observations, in most cases analyzed, there were no differences between the sexes in open water swimming. In some instances, women were faster than men. However, depending upon sample size and the statistical approach, women were faster than men in this specific sports discipline. Now, these swims are highly exclusive. The total number of people to have completed the Triple Crown is 366. 170 of which were women, which is about 46%. I tried to find a more general breakdown of who enters these events, because if half as many women enter, for example, but still 46% complete the event, that could tell us something about the average prowess of a female swimmer versus a male swimmer. According to an article from alongswim.org on May 17th, 2014, I guess that's where we are with this video. 23 people in total entered the Manhattan Island Marathon Swim that year, with 17 of them being men and 6 being women. And that's the best I could really find, which is not very good data, so there's not much of a point in including in this video. One important thing to note, however, is how few people enter these events. Those who finish in first or top 3 are often the same people. And for complete fairness, as we've discussed, results vary from competition to competition as the salinity or temperature of the water or distance of the competition changes. But what I want you to consider is if that makes you think, okay, so men are better at swimming, just women are better under very specific circumstances, go back to the beginning of the video. Sports are made up. All of these things, the density or the salinity or the temperature of the water or the distance of the competition, all of these are set in stone by some human somewhere, and that stone can change at any moment if a different human comes up with a different rule set. In fact, I think it's a perfectly fair argument that the default Earth swim is at colder temperatures and high salinity, since most of the water is ocean. At a minimum, I think we can agree that it's not cut and dry. Probably because we're swimming. The statement, men are better than women at swimming, is far and away too simplistic, even if you're accounting for the fact that men are very dominant when it comes to the Olympics. Alrighty, we've been wet and wild for a little too long, and I'm sure you're thinking, so what? You probably selected the one physical sport where it can be argued there's gender parity. I bet you Googled sports that women outperform men in. No comment, but fair enough. Let us ask the question of this video. Who do you think is better at basketball? Men or women? Oh man, I think this is the part of the video where the sports nerds start to get angry in the comments. I hear you, I see you, you're valid. So the way I want to engage with this, from my perspective as someone who hasn't touched a basketball since high school gym class, is just to present to you some data. Alright, don't be mad at the numbers, they're just numbers, baby. It's just data, baby. It's not me up here, it's you, alright? Oh god, this is... yeah, here we go. Rather than burying the lead this time, it's no secret why men are better at basketball. On average, men are taller, stronger, quicker, and since basketball is a contact sport, all of these things confer different advantages. But let's look at some numbers. The tallest member of the WNBA who is currently active is Brittany Griner at 6 foot 9 inches. The shortest member of the NBA is Yuki Kawamura at 5 foot 8 inches. Now, to be fair, Yuki is an outlier, a very prominent outlier, and from what I understand, while he is on the Grizzlies, he is essentially only in the G League, which is like a funnel to train NBA players. He's not a starter at all, but there are many players in the NBA, the next shortest players, at 6 foot even, 6 foot 0 inches. Steph Curry, a name even I am familiar with, stands at 6 foot 2 inches. So not a giant, not a giraffe. Not a giraffe? What am I doing? Now, the average WNBA player's height is 6 foot 0 inches, while the average NBA player's height is 6 foot 6 inches. So the average height of the men is obviously higher, but there is significant overlap across all players. So in other words, height alone isn't stopping women from being better than men at basketball. Not at the level of individual players. Strength contributes to quite a few things in this sport. Simply being able to muscle your way past an opponent, for one, but the WNBA three-point line is closer than the NBA three-point line to, quote, make the three-point shot a more accessible scoring option for players. Alright. I'd like to introduce to you someone many of you already know. Credit to JXmyhighroller for compiling this data, and their video will be linked down below. I highly recommend it. Caitlin Clark's average three-point shot is from a greater distance than even the longest scoring players in the NBA. And that's with the WNBA three-point line being closer, so she's not even incentivized to do that. As a percentage of total offense, she's only beaten out by one player across both leagues, Luca Doncic. Luca D. Luca D's nuts. Wait. Be nice to me in the comments. She is almost single-handedly responsible for the WNBA's viewership skyrocketing, a fact that is laid bare when you look at the average viewership of her team, the Fever, versus the other teams in the WNBA. And perhaps most impressive of all is the fact that she was a rookie while doing all of this. Obviously, we're not comparing exact apples to exact apples. The average height of the NBA is greater, and height is a major component of basketball defense. You cannot simply translate Caitlin Clark's results to the NBA. If you put her, as she is now, into that field, almost certainly her results would decrease. However, if she was trained to play in that field, if she worked towards excelling in this more difficult environment, we simply do not know where her results would end up. But it's quite clear that at the minigame of putting the ball into the hoop, she is world class, bar no person of any gender. And yes, I know there are gameplay differences between the NBA and the WNBA, such as the ball itself being a different size. But this is something that I think it would be silly to assume she couldn't overcome if she was trained in that different circumstance. When it comes to strength being a component of basketball, there is something to be said about the average differences between men and women. However, do you really think little bro is muscling his way past Margot Didak, Hanzu, or Brittany Griner? Yeah, no. And I want to make it clear, I'm not making the point that every single woman in the WNBA is 100% capable of playing in the NBA, if only they had been encouraged to dream. That's not the point I'm making. The point I am making is that on an individual level, it's not as clear as one would make it out to be. This is especially true when you look at the different levels of societal interest and funding being put to these different but similar categories of sport. The WNBA grosses $200 million every year, but generally operates at a loss. The NBA grosses $11 billion every year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of interest. That's a lot of attention. But most importantly for our purposes, that's a lot of care. Care to find the best coaches, to perfect the best training regimens, and so on. To that effect, that's also more money to compel players to actually fight for their spot in these leagues. The highest paid woman in the WNBA makes $250,000 a year, with 9.3% of overall league revenue going towards players. The highest paid man in the NBA makes $55 million a year, with 50% of overall league revenue going to players. So yeah, I would agree with many of the objections that you might make towards the viability of the average WNBA player in the NBA. But what of the circumstances that make it inherently difficult to even attempt doing such a thing? Or more broadly, to develop into the best athlete you can be? Here's an inconvenient truth. It is societally discouraged for women and girls to care about sports, or even competition in general. But even more so, they are taught the same narratives that I am dispelling right now in this moment. Obviously, the average person wouldn't say that men have a biological advantage at NASCAR. But the prevailing narrative of men are better than women at sports cannot be ignored. Neither can its effects on those who hear it and their willingness to even participate in such activities. This is especially true when we think about how arbitrary sports as a concept are. As the old joke goes, the only thing in common between football and figure skating is breathing. And while it is true that there is a biological function that testosterone serves in compelling those with a lot of it towards social status, that only serves to reinforce my point that men are given status for something women are not. For more about that, I recommend Robert Sapolsky's The Trouble with Testosterone. It's not as simple as testosterone makes men aggressive and competitive. It's that we give social status towards things like violence and aggression, but that's a whole other video. To give an anecdote towards my point, my middle school best friend was a girl. you wouldn't know her. She goes somewhere else. In 7th grade, her and one of her female friends wanted to join the football team. American football. Not only a contact sport, but a collision sport. This was resisted. The entire apparatus of teachers and counselors, the adults in the room, wanted to change their minds. Wanted them to do something else. But the existence of Title IX and the lack of a female alternative, they couldn't legally do that. My friend's father discouraged her, but to his credit, did not stop her. She had to make a promise to him that she would be careful and not get injured. Now, her time on the field was quite brief. Her friend dropped out after only a few practices, and I think the sausage fest around her did not encourage her to continue, let's say. But as for being injured, the only thing I really remember about her playing football was all of the boys making fun of one boy, George, let's call him, for being absolutely flattened by her in practice. And I do think the fact that I still find it a little bit funny, and the fact that it was so funny back then, does reinforce the point that I'm making about the overarching narratives here. To be clear, she wasn't the largest person on the field, but she was also far from the smallest. If safety is the concern here, I'm sure you're also willing to mentally restrict the smaller boys from playing football. Right? While there are some fathers who would be this worried for their sons, if you imagine a father, a mother, and a boy who wants to play football, it's the father reassuring the mother that he'll be fine, it'll be all right, he'll make friends, all the boys do it. It's important to note that this is 7th grade. The average athletic abilities of boys and girls at this age are barely divergent. This is around the time the differences start to appear, but it's a far cry from being uncompetitive. It's the societal norms that surround gender dynamics that made these girls have an uphill battle to even play a game that they loved. And I used to be an Uber driver, and while driving around and thinking about the script for this video, I noticed how many football stadiums there are. I mean, I live in Texas, it's one per school. All of those hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in many cases, such as my small hometown of 5,000 people. That's money towards only one gender sport. Maybe female football exists, I don't know. I haven't heard of it, and I live in Texas. So if it does exist, it's not funded. And that's kind of the point I'm making. I think there's something to pay attention to in that, right? And on that note, I think it's time we brought reality back into the picture. My trans friends, you exist again! How was that liminal space? Did you get enough rest? Are you hydrated? Wait, do they have Cabo Bobs there? Let me know in the comment section below. Burritos in the... burritos in the 5th dimension, yeah. This video is attempting to talk to somebody who is worried about men in women's sports. So if that's you, thank you. Not everybody has a mind open enough to stick around this long when it's somebody with a completely different perspective talking at them. I really do appreciate you. If you're worried about this topic, odds are the concept of transness in general is quite foreign to you. Perhaps you've heard some commentators say, woke lunatics want to deny biology, or cutting your penis off doesn't make you a woman. Let's start here. Trans men, people who are born female but who identify as men, are men. And trans women, people born male but who identify as women, are women. What do I mean by woman? Am I saying that chromosomally a trans woman has swapped from XY to XX? Do I believe that biology is a transphobic science devoid of reality? No, of course not. No trans person is denying biology. To be trans means to identify with a gender you were not born into. Underlying that is an acknowledgement of your sex assigned at birth. If that wasn't being considered, then I don't know what trans would even be referring to. Cisgender people align with the birth they were assigned at sex. Other way around. And transgender people don't. Those are inherently biological definitions. So women can have XY chromosomes? Women can even be born with XY chromosomes.
I have a vagina. The thing is, I also have balls. Right here. Right where a lot of you have ovaries. I was born with XY chromosomes, which you probably know as male chromosomes. And I was born with a vagina and balls inside my body.
It's called complete androgen insensitivity. Women can be born with a verguba, but XY chromosomes. Biology is simply messy and not clear-cut in that way.
Most people assume that you're biologically either a man or a woman, but it's actually a lot more complex than that.
That's also why people use sex assigned at birth rather than birth sex. It's actually just more accurate language. But yes, women can be born with XY chromosomes because gender is not biological. By definition, historically, sex and gender were synonyms. But we all recognize, in one way or another, that there is far more to manliness or femininity than simple biology. Gender, as we understand it now, is the word that encompasses all of these learned, societally enforced aspects of being a man, a woman, or anything in between. In America, it used to be considered too manly for women to wear jeans. Women wear skirts and dresses, while boys wear jeans and pinwheel hats. Meanwhile, in Scotland, what everyone in America would call a skirt, men traditionally wear. Women are taught to speak ladylike and to sit like a lady, while men's posture and voices aren't policed in this way. Men are taught to be providers, but women are the original providers, giving their bodies as homes to us all at the start, and providing us with food from their milk. Men are taught not to cry. Women are taught that emotions are their biological weakness. Our concept of man and woman has very little to do with biology, actually. It has far more to do with our performance in a broader social context. And I don't know about you, but I believe in freedom. I believe that individuals have the right to enable their own lives. I don't think the circumstances of our birth should contribute to the way we're treated as people or the aspects of society we're allowed to identify with. Forcing people into rigid, societally enforced personal conceptions, that sounds pretty authoritarian, pretty, yes, dear leader, I am a loyal servant to your vision of the future. Pretty anti-freedom, to me. Let people determine their own lives. But I think that's enough preaching, and again, I really do appreciate you for hearing me out. So, trans women in women's sports. Let's get into it. Up until now, we've been telling a story. A good story, but a story fraught with incompleteness and inaccuracy. Men in women's sports isn't based on the reality of what's happening, even if we're using the language of biological man. Why? Well, what makes someone a biological man in a way that we care about for sports? Something muscle density, something hormone levels. As it turns out, virtually every physical sport requires trans women to meet certain hormone standards before they're allowed to compete. And they also must enter with the identity they use in day-to-day life. So the narrative of a man putting on a wig with pigtails and a dress and dominating women is just untrue. At a professional level, the shortest time frame I've seen is 2 years of HRT, hormone replacement therapy. That's mandatory before a trans woman is allowed to compete in a female-specific sports discipline. We got there. End of the sentence. Goddamn. But why are cis men typically physically stronger than cis women? Well, it has to do with hormone levels. Hormones such as testosterone. This is why World Athletics requires trans women to have a testosterone level of less than 5 nanomoles per liter to qualify for the women's events. And strict hormone requirements such as this have actually impacted cis women, women born with a naturally high level of testosterone.
I'm born a woman. I have a condition, DSD, but genetically, it's something that you can say you cannot control it. Each and every individual has got the right of being, has got the right to compete in sports. When a woman does great, it becomes a problem. But then when a man does good, they are phenomenal. Yes, I'm different, but it don't make me less a woman.
Yeah, that's right. her being born with a different body doesn't make her any less of a woman. Strict hormone standards like this are a good jumping off point to actually talk about fairness in sports. What does fairness mean? We say we value it, we know we apply it to sports, but what does that actually look like? Let me give you an example. Magnus Carlsen is the best chess player alive. He was the classical world chess champion for a full decade before he decided to not defend his title and instead focus on speed chess. But since 2023, when he chose to not defend, he has maintained his position as the #1 classical chess player by rating. So he would still be the overwhelming favorite if he ever chose to try. Is it fair that the #2 ranked player was born at the same time as Magnus? Is it fair that some dude can be so good at the game that you have spent your life mastering that he can simply be bored with the most prestigious title and focus on other things? Where is the fairness in Magnus's dominance? Perhaps a more insane example is that of Nigel Richards. He is the best English Scrabble player alive, and his achievements make me feel subhuman. He's the 5-time US national champion, 8-time UK Open champion, 11-time Singapore Open champion, and a 15-time winner of the King's Cup in Bangkok, which is the world's biggest English Scrabble competition, by the way. Nigel spent so long dominating English Scrabble that in 2015, he decided to enter the French World Scrabble Championships. He won. Later in 2018, he won again. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, he doesn't speak French.
Oh my god! Oh,
you see, Nigel has a photographic memory. So all he did was read a French dictionary 2 or 3 times, and to study he would, quote, flip through the pages in his mind while riding his bike. Doesn't know what the words mean, though. In 2024, he also entered the Spanish World Championship. He won. Doesn't speak that one either. What is fair to Scrabble players near and far about Nigel's existence? By all accounts, he's playing by the rules of Scrabble. He has the same game board, the same game mechanics, and the same odds of drawing good letters as anyone else. But he seems to break our notions of fairness. If fairness is our North Star when it comes to competition, would we block Nigel from competing simply for being too good at Scrabble? It's not just that he's good, I might hear you say. He was born with an unfair advantage. Not everyone has a photographic memory. Okay. So should we bar people above a certain height from competing in basketball? Isn't that simply an unfair advantage that they were born with and didn't earn? Should we make a separate league for basketball players born too tall so they don't mess up the other one? Or Scrabble players born with a photographic memory? Or trans women for being born biologically male? It's a common narrative that men are simply going to pretend to be women in order to scheme some quick and easy gold medals and then move on with their lives. This is often portrayed by the right as something that happens all the time. Let's actually think about this for a moment. You watching, how many men do you know? A few, I presume. How many men do you know that are willing to live their life as a woman, are willing to pretend to be a woman, to take feminizing hormones, simply to compete against and dominate women in sports? Yeah, I don't know any like that either. Most of the men I know are terrified of even being perceived as feminine, let alone living their life as a woman. The idea that trans women are pretenders who are willing to face the current antagonistic media firestorm pointed in their direction, essentially for goofs and gaffes, is at best misguided. This is especially true when you look at the reality of trans women dominating women's sports. The most common stat I've seen cited is a UN report says that 900 medals have been stolen from women.
Trans athletes have stolen 890 medals from women.
It's 890 medals and trophies that we know of in the last 5 years.
Men taking 900 sports trophies from women.
Let's take a closer look at this claim. The report this comes from is titled Violence Against Women in Sports. Firstly, this isn't a report from the UN, it's a report submitted to the UN. This claim of 900 medals comes from one sentence in the report. According to information received by the 30th of March 2024, over 600 female athletes and more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports when competing against males. The citation for this claim reads, Submission from Women's Liberation Front, International Consortium on Female Sport, and Diane Post on behalf of Lavender Patch. John Oliver's team link this citation to shewon.org, a user-submitted website that tallies trans athletes who have placed in the money, so to speak. To verify this, we have that one weird trick that internet historians don't want you knowing about. The Wayback Machine, baby! So as claimed, according to information received by March 30th, 2024, 600 athletes, 400 competitions, 890 medals, and 29 sports. So that's what we're looking for. Looking at March 25th in the Wayback Machine, we have 620 athletes, 879 medals, 423 competitions, and 28 sports. So not enough medals and not enough sports, but overall very similar numbers. Going to April 1st, which was the next date preserved by the Wayback Machine, the website lists 625 athletes, 894 medals, 428 competitions, and that cheeky number, 29 sports. Going back to the Violence Against Women in Sports report, this data matches very well to the information received by March 30th, 2024. Looking more closely at the citation, Women's Liberation Front had this contribution, as it reads from their document. An organization formed to keep track of males claiming victory in female sports has identified over 900 instances in which males deprived female athletes of records, scholarships, or other opportunities. That's unhelpfully vague. Which organization? What competitions? Shewon.org is cheekily mentioned in Women's Liberation Front's document, but is not mentioned as, quote, the organization. So, Shewon.org. What's up with this website? The first thing I want to point out to you is when you hear 900 medals, I mean, first of all, they're not even all medals, but sure, fine. When you hear 900 medals, your first thought is there are 900 competitions that trans women have placed first or earned medals in. This is not the case. As you can see here, this is the same competition, but listed 3 times. The person who got 4th should have gotten 3rd, the person who got 3rd should have gotten 2nd, and 2nd should have gotten 1st. The logic of the website goes. So if a trans woman ever earned a gold medal, that counts as 3 different medals earned, according to the logic of the website. Another thing to remind you of is this website is user submitted, so anyone can submit an entry for any competition or any category. To be fair, most of the entries have a link to the alleged competition, but far from all. However, there are plenty of, let's just say, dubious submissions. Billiards, for example, is a gender-neutral sport. Women's divisions in sports like this and chess don't exist because women are genetically inferior at hitting a ball with a stick or thinking. They exist as a way to encourage women to join the sport and to help them find community. In the melee community, we have Smash Sisters for the same reason. And yes, as pointed out by John Oliver's team, there are some very comical submissions, such as Irish dancing and, wait for it, the women's divisions of hot dog eating contests. So you're telling me that cis women can't put wieners down as good as trans women? Huh.
Hello?
Kim, I think we need to break up.
Why?
To be fair, there were only 9 non-athletic submissions at the time of the Violence Against Women report, and they were tabulated separately, as far as I can tell. But their inclusion at all tells you everything you need to know about the website's ethos. This is a transphobic smear site. Plain and simple. This website isn't about fairness and competition. It's about refusing to see others' right to determine their own lives. It seeks to simply invalidate the existence of trans women. That's transphobic. And for the final nail in the coffin regarding the organization, for some ungodly reason, Women's Liberation Front decided to post the full transcript of their correspondence with the researchers at Last Week Tonight. From D, asking questions to Women's Liberation Front, according to posts on the message board over it, a user named Watcher at the Gates created the she1.org website in June 2021. That user initially posted, "Hi everyone, amazingly, the simple URL she1.org was available, so I snagged it. I can make a simple website that lists which woman would have won what award if they had not been displaced by a man." So this So this organization, run by a person on an anonymous message board with anonymously user-submitted data of potentially dubious competitions that overcounts the wins of trans women, is the best available evidence for the dominance of trans women in women's sports. I don't have to say more, do I? The standard can't be that no trans athlete can ever win a competition or injure another player, because that's an impossible standard. Cis athletes win competitions and injure each other kind of a lot. Just look at the rate of CTE in the NFL. For every example of a trans athlete winning a competition, there are dozens of mediocre trans athletes you just never hear about. Mediocre Trans Athlete Visibility Day. Caring about a single instance of a trans athlete winning a competition is at best based in misinformation, and at worst, based in transphobia. If you want to care about fairness in sports, what you need to pay attention to is the relative performance of trans athletes. Do they have a statistical advantage? Not did they win one competition one time. Because that happens sometimes. This is another way the story from the beginning of this video is simply broken. The truth is, studies on trans athletes are few and far between, and of the ones that we do have, nearly all, if not all, suffer from significant sample size issues. But in the interest of fairness to the data we do have, let's take a brief look at a few of the available studies. But just to reiterate, there are hundreds of studies on the differences between cis men and cis women athletes. But these are not useful as actual data. Maybe we can build some hypotheses around them, but trans women are not the same as biological men in many of the ways we care about when it comes to sports. This first study caught my eye because it looks at the medical records and fitness test results of trans people serving in the US Air Force from 2004 to 2014. That's also a covert reminder that trans people aren't only a post-woke phenomena. They've been around a while. This study looked at 29 trans men and 46 trans women who began transitioning after entering the US Air Force. This allowed the authors to compare pre- and post-hormone replacement therapy, fitness test results, and medical records. Prior to gender-affirming hormones, trans women performed 31% more push-ups and 15% more sit-ups and ran 1.5 miles 21% faster than their female counterparts. After 2 years of taking feminizing hormones, the push-up and sit-up differences disappeared, but trans women were still 12% faster at the mile and a half. For trans men, after 1 year of taking masculinizing hormones, there was no longer a difference in push-ups or run times, and the number of sit-ups performed in 1 minute by trans men exceeded the average performance of their male counterparts. Yet, no one seems to talk about banning trans men from men's sports. I wonder why that is. A few things to point out about this data. While people in the Air Force are absolutely going to be athletic and fit, this isn't exactly the same as being an athlete training in a specific sports discipline. So this isn't exactly one-to-one transferable data, but it's still a decent approximator. Another thing is simply the sample size. 46 trans women and 29 trans men leave something to be desired. And my final note is the length of HRT. 2 years for trans women and 1 year for trans men. It seems with relatively short timescales, some of the physical differences between cis and trans women disappear, but others may still remain. If this timescale was lengthened, what differences would we see if any. This next study is out of the Physical Education Department at Hong Kong Baptist University. The study compares 19 cisgender men to 12 transgender men, and 23 transgender women to 21 cisgender women, all of them being some sort of athlete. So that's nice. In this cohort of athletes, trans women had similar testosterone concentration, higher estrogen, higher absolute hand grip strength, lower relative jump height, and lower relative VO2 max compared with cis women athletes. Trans men had similar testosterone concentration, lower absolute hand grip strength, and lower absolute VO2 max than cis men. I don't know what you guys got from that, but I know what I got. Trans girls can't jump. We should start that rumor. And next time you hear somebody arguing to ban trans women from sports, we should just say, they can't even jump. Have you seen one jump? New Chinese study proves trans women got no vertical. You probably noticed this yourself, but the sample size here is pretty lacking. A new limitation for this study, however, is how it was designed. Being a cross-sectional analysis like this makes causation blurry. This is a reasonable comparative assessment of the athletic abilities of cis and trans people, but it doesn't tell you about the specific causal effects of hormone replacement therapy on an athlete's body. Only the comparative effects. However, based on this data, the researchers concluded the following. Compared with cisgender women, transgender women have decreased lung function, increasing their work in breathing. Regardless of fat-free mass distribution, transgender women performed worse on the counter-movement jump than cisgender women and cis men. Those bitches can't jump. God. I can't either. Although transgender women have comparable absolute VO2 max values to cisgender women, when normalized for body weight, transgender women's cardiovascular fitness is lower than cis men and women. Therefore, this research shows the potential complexity of transgender athlete physiology. Ultimately, they argue against a blanket ban on trans athletes, arguing, while longitudinal transitioning studies of transgender athletes are urgently needed, these results should caution against precautionary bans and sport eligibility exclusions that are not based on sport-specific or sport-relevant research. Which that's hard to argue with, right? Let's actually wait and collect and evaluate data before we make broad, sweeping decisions. Our biases are never the end of the story. The final data point we will look at is a systematic review of the available literature. The review scraped 4 different databases between the years of 1999 and 2020, and found 24 different studies that met their eligibility criteria. This review assessed long-term gender-affirming hormone therapy, GAT, and its effects on different measures of physical strength and fitness. 12 months of GAT saw decreases in lean body mass by about 3% and muscle cross-sectional area by about 6%. However, longer exposure to GAT did not always lower muscle cross-sectional area further. Strength loss after around 12 months ranged from non-significant to around 7%. Taking these strength data collectively, the small decrease in strength in trans women after 12 to 36 months of GAT suggests that trans women likely retain a strength advantage over cisgender women. Whether longer duration of GAT would yield further decrements in strength in transgender women is unknown. However, this isn't the end of the story. Looking at the effects of GAT on hemoglobin and hematocrit, trans women are at parity with cis women after only 3 or 4 months. It's worth explaining what that even means. Hemoglobin is a protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen throughout the body. Hematocrit is the percentage of the red blood cells in your blood. So hemoglobin helps transport oxygen from the lungs to the rest of the body, and hematocrit gives you an idea of how well you are able to transport it in the first place. Due to these two measures being in parity between cis and trans women, but the average size and structure of cis and trans women's bodies are not in perfect parity, the researchers conclude it is possible that trans female athletes experience impaired endurance performance. Now, it may well be true that trans women maintain a strength advantage over cis women, But this paragraph of the review is worth paying attention to. Compared with cisgender men, hormone-naive trans women not undergoing GAT, demonstrate 7% lower lean body mass, 9% lower muscle cross-sectional area, and 12% lower hand grip strength. This disparity is noteworthy, given that hormone-naive trans women and cisgender men have similar testosterone levels. Taking the whole review into account, Harper et al. Have this to say on the subject of trans women in women's sports. Taken together, hormone-naive trans women may not, on average, have the same athletic attributes as cisgender men. The need to move beyond simple comparisons of cisgender men and women to assess the sporting capabilities of trans women is imperative. In this video, I have intentionally avoided talking about specific, high-profile examples of trans women in women's sports. Mostly because individual examples tell us nothing about fairness. Broad trends in the data are what really matter. But there's also the calling attention to people that receive far more negativity and hate than they deserve. Whether or not 50 years from now we settle this issue and have different rules regarding participation than we do today, none of these women are breaking any rules. They are simply obeying the governing body's decisions that surround them. Sure, some of them may fight for their inclusion, argue for their right to be seen or heard, but none of those things should be detrimental to one's character. I bring this up because I actually lied at the beginning of the video. I've played 2 whole sports in my whole life. Soccer before I could think for myself, but I currently and very casually play disc golf.
My angle's a little bad today.
Goal! Goal! Trees don't care about your feelings. It's a cool sport that's relatively easy to get into for anyone interested. You just pay $50 for 2 or 3 professional frisbees and play whenever you want at a local park near you for free. I love that. But seeing the hatred and vitriol towards one athlete, one trans woman, simply for playing a game that I love, is disheartening to see. It makes me hesitant to advocate for people to play a game that has such an unlikable section of its fan base. But I do want to talk about one specific athlete this late in the video, because I do have a bit of a leg to stand on playing the game casually. Natalie Ryan. Before I do, and I will spare you the full details of my nerd rant, but a brief bit about the fairness of trans women in disc golf. Yes, it is generally true that cis men perform better than cis women in disc golf, but have you considered the fact that 1/12 the amount of people play in the female category, play in the FPO, than the MPO? 1/12. If you think you have seen the full potential of women in disc golf, you're simply mistaken. Alright? Also, there are like big muscle boys that don't throw very far, and lanky noodle arm boys can be some of the best distance throwers. And yes, men do on average have longer arms, and longer arms does translate to more distance with proper technique, but at that point, we should be segregating disc golf based on like height or wingspan or something. Also, the literal GOAT of disc golf is only 5'8", and none of this is even getting into the fact that trans women are required to take 2 years of HRT before they're allowed to compete in the FPO. Technique is the most relevant factor in your ability to play disc golf well, short of not having arms in the first place. Full stop. I'm not saying there definitely 100% isn't an inherent advantage. But I am saying, believing there definitely 100% is an inherent advantage that is impossible to overcome is simply to have not thought about it deeply enough. Just had to get that off my chest after reading so many hateful comments while researching this video. There is a significant portion of disc golfers and comment sections on Reddit and YouTube that are purely hateful and transphobic. The live coverage of the FPO even blocks their comment section on YouTube because of how much of a cesspool it always turns into. But to be fair, there are people that I wouldn't quite consider hateful, but do hold regressive and contradictory things in their minds. Take this Reddit comment as an example of someone who doesn't want to openly misgender Natalie Ryan, but doesn't want to think through what they're actually saying. Playing casually and competing are two very different things. No one is telling her she can't play disc golf, or even that she can't compete in disc golf. She just can't compete against a field where she obviously has an advantage. There are different T-pads for men and women on tour for a reason. Alright, let's break this down. Imagine some dude playing at a low professional level becomes a convicted PDF file, and everyone in the community believes that and doesn't defend him. There would absolutely be calls to kick him out of disc golf. No one like that should be in our community. Don't let him play in a tournament ever again. People want to have the idea in their head that they are tolerant, but they don't want to deal with the actual consequences of what they're advocating for when it comes to trans women in sports. In a case where someone understands they're supposed to be openly antagonistic, like my hypothetical, there's no disconnect between what people are saying and the result they're ultimately advocating for. Just as that semi-professional disc golfer could go to any park and play golf, so long as it's not within 200 feet of a school, so could any trans person. Both of them face the risk for being recognized and perhaps told to get out of here, or being physically assaulted for who they are in relation to this community. But most of the time they go to the park, nothing would happen. They could continue playing at some level, but playing the game of disc golf in the most abstract, devoid of context way is very different from playing disc golf as most people would mean it. They mean they're in that community. They watch videos from content creators. They practice and practice and practice. They most likely know at least a dozen faces exclusively connected to them through this community. If you enter tournaments, it's much the same. There are most likely dozens of faces you only know due to and only see on the occasion of entering tournaments. As I mentioned before, I know this firsthand as someone who used to enter competitive Melee tournaments. There are 30 or 40 amazing people that I don't really have much contact with anymore because I don't go to tournaments anymore. If anyone from that community is watching this, I love you guys, and I promise I will come out sometime soon. For those who haven't participated in a community in this way, think of all of the people that you no longer have contact with, aren't friends with anymore, and ultimately aren't in community with anymore, simply because you graduated high school. I think it's very easy to get caught up in rhetoric without remembering the actual human effects of what we're discussing. And to simply address this head on, which of these competitors has the biological advantage? Which one, based on the actual ground truth of results, is dominating the field? Can you point to this Natalie Ryan and her unfair advantage? Yes, I am baiting you. She's not number one. She's in fact 13th in the world, with her average points being 1/5 that of the number one players, and roughly 1/3 that of numbers 2 and 3. And I say this as someone who loves watching the FPO coverage, shoutouts to my girl Owen Scoggins. She's 13th in the category, with 1/12 the amount of entrants. On April 20th of last year, someone called in a threat at the Music City Open. This was the first time anything like this had ever happened in disc golf. And it was called in because Natalie Ryan was playing. To be clear, I don't think most disc golfers want to see Natalie Ryan physically harmed, but they do want to hold these contradictory ideas in their head. To explain more what I mean, let's listen in on a little bit of a disc golf podcast. Don't worry, it's not too much, just a little bit.
Females must be protected in our division. This is unfair. I refuse to play. Woo! Yeah!
In this podcast, Abigail Wilson explains that she refused to play last month against Natalie Ryan for her own safety concerns.
Because I knew that there was some planned protests. I just felt very unsafe to be on the course.
Perfectly valid. But the entire narrative is about how unfair this is to her, for her to have to deal with these safety concerns.
You're saying during the discussion of trying to change tee times, you misgendered Natalie Ryan in that conversation?
Correct, which I was then told disciplinary action would be taken.
Because like obviously that wasn't a policy at some point in time, right?
Yeah, I think compelled speech should never be a policy.
To Abigail's accounting of events, her misgendering of Natalie Ryan was taken far more seriously than her safety concerns. Well, why are we not talking about the safety of the person actually being targeted?
Sounds like it was almost like two parts. One, feeling like it's not fair to have to play against Natalie Ryan in your same division, but also sounds like you didn't feel safe. The threats that were thrown out last year kind of, roll over obviously into the same tournament this year. So those two things basically made your decision to, not play that event.
Why are we celebrating someone who speaks up for herself when it's someone else who is far more directly in danger?
Yeah, it's the speech thing is tough for me because you can see when people are saying it maliciously. They're trying to say it to hurt the person's feelings, get under the person's skin. But then there's also the other side of where it's like, I just don't believe that. I believe that if you're born a female, you're a female.
Why do we continue rhetoric that harms others? She clearly knows that saying him or his is harmful. Otherwise, she wouldn't attempt to refrain from saying them in public when referring to Natalie Ryan.
I typically just try to address someone by their name, so I don't have to worry about pronouns.
Yep.
But they still slip out.
If I have a concern for my safety, I just can't stand for also being told how I can speak, especially when I'm not being hateful to anyone.
How much of someone else's safety are you willing to ignore to emphasize your own? How much of someone else's safety are you willing to ignore to perpetuate your own political narrative? While Abigail would almost certainly never attempt to physically harm Natalie Ryan, her rhetoric emboldens those that would. Whether or not you want to exclude someone because of who they are, that's your choice. Let's just be honest about what we're doing. All right, everyone. I've talked a lot. Let me just leave you with my takeaway after researching all of this. It's perfectly plausible, even likely in some cases, that trans women will maintain an advantage over cis women in specific sports disciplines. Personally, I view this issue more as a scapegoat to attack a vulnerable minority group. Virtually none of the nuance is present in the mainstream discourse. And considering you just watched 70 minutes of nuance, I don't know how long this will be in the final edit, but that alone speaks for itself. My opinion likely will include some restrictions in some sports, following the evidence of actual advantage, but allow me to leave you with the most powerful argument for total inclusion I've heard. Inclusion is kind of rad. I know there were many racist white people angry at Jackie Robinson when he first joined the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. I didn't Google that, I know sports. But there were also many moderate white people who were overall passive about the situation. I'm sure if you told this passive cohort that black people would end up disproportionately filling out the teams they know and love, or even becoming the majority of players on them, many would have found friends among the furious. But previously prohibited athletes coming to dominate a category of sport doesn't mean that category is broken or gonna collapse. In many important ways, the modern sports landscape was greatly elevated with greater inclusion. Trans women are women. They may be a physiologically distinct category of woman, but they are nonetheless women. Women's sports are for women. The Paralympics is a valuable lens to view the power of inclusion through. There are athletes, side by side, competing in the same category with entirely distinct bodies. You'll see runners, one with both of their legs, one with one of their legs, and one with no legs, all competing together. We don't sit there and angrily seethe. We don't look at the running blades and say, they can give a mechanical advantage to that runner. We simply watch and enjoy the competition. And for those that argue the Paralympics isn't about competition, it's simply a participation trophy, first of all, that's condescending, but more importantly, factually wrong. Look these athletes in the face and tell them they're not a competitor. After training for years, winning the competition, screaming out in ecstasy, look them in the eyes and tell them, you didn't earn that. In short, let the girlies play. Let them play. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video, especially if you started off with a different perspective than me. I really do appreciate you being here. Please consider interacting with the video to boost the algorithm, and head over to my Patreon if you want to financially support me. Remember, we are capable and worthy of love. Share that with those around you. And good luck out there.
Yeah, so I was saying earlier that my opinion likely would be some restrictions in some sports based on the evidence, but honestly, since I wrote this script, my opinion is pretty much evolving towards total inclusion. I don't know. Let the girlies play. Now watch this drive.
I feel like you normally drove further.